Good morning. Welcome to TPSE's Conversations on Grading and Assessment. Today, I'm Kate Stevenson from Cal State Northridge, and today we're in conversation with Jeff Anderson from Foothill College. Welcome, Jeff.
Hi, Kate. Thank you so much for this opportunity and all the great work you're doing. I'm excited to speak with you.
It's a wonderful project. Just to let people know, TPSE Math stands for Transforming Post-Secondary Education in Mathematics. And this year we have a special project to look into people who are innovators and leaders in grading and assessment. So as I said, today we're in conversation on alternative assessment with Jeff Anderson from Foothill College in Los Altos. So just to start with, Jeff, I wonder if you could tell us about where you are. Tell us a little bit about Foothill College. We have you on the map there up in the Bay Area. That means it's raining on you right now.
Yes, it is. Foothill College is in Los Altos Hills, California, about maybe a little less than halfway between San Jose and San Francisco. We're on the peninsula. It's part of a two-college district, which is the Foothill De Anza Community College District. We serve students from all over the Bay Area, but mostly this peninsula area, as well as a bunch of international students. Foothill is very well known as a transfer institution. I just got an email yesterday or a few days ago from our president that said we got ranked #1 in the nation for community colleges, which I always kind of feel sick about because the idea of ranking colleges to me is humanizing. But right. Some of the students were excited about that. And I was like, no more ranking.
Right. But if there's going to be a ranking, why not be on top?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's fun for students that it's really well known as a transfer institution. It does a lot of good work in that space.
Well, thank you for your work. And it's really important that we're in conversation across different university types so that we understand where our students are transferring from if we're at four-year institutions. Okay, so here's our first question. So here we go. What are your current grading policies? And can you paint a picture for how your class works in a given day?
Certainly. I wonder if I can share a screen and just kind of show some of the structures so that I'm...
Sure. Let me just stop sharing. So all yours.
Cool. One of the things that I wanted to show here, this is part of how I work. In these conversations, I feel so blessed and honored to be in dialogue. And the stuff that we're going to talk about has taken long enough and it's complicated enough that the idea that we're going to get all these resources in like a 20-minute talk sometimes leaves me feeling painful, or an hour talk or whatever, a lot of pain and suffering. And so one of the things that I've done for this talk, I'm not quite done with it, but I tried to take the questions that you and I worked on together and turn them into a nice blog post with a drop-down menu for each question. And so in the links to this video, I hope that we can include this. I'm not done with it yet, but it's here for you. The reason I wanted to show this, though, is that I'm going to use this as kind of a guideline for how I do my work. So I'll try to answer out loud, and then I'll share the screen to kind of highlight some of that. So I suppose the first thing that I should say is that I run a really interesting class. It's a flipped classroom, ungraded environment. Flipped classroom means that students get access to material outside of class. Ungraded is that I effectively minimize my use of and conversations of letter grades during the time that I work with my students. Mm-hmm. A very high level description of how I deal with grades in my class is that if a student finishes their work in my class, I empower them to choose their own grade. And because of the way that I structure my class, if a student gets through their learning portfolio and does it in really meaningful ways, that's how they earn their right to grade. And at that point, I say, you definitely should give yourself an A. Right? I like my students have a lot of autonomy, but if a student finishes the work that I ask them to finish, that is beyond A-level work. Actually, I'd like to say that A's are degrading because they take a 12-week experience, an entire lifetime, and project them onto a single dimensional axis with 5 letters. But from the traditional standpoint of what an A means, which is excellence, by the time a student finishes, I have a lot of evidence that they have achieved excellence in my class. And so it ends up that out of a 40-person class, probably 37 or 38 students have the ability to give themselves A's. Every quarter, I have 1 or 2 students that refuse to do that. They give themselves a B or C, even when I argue with them. But I like them to have that choice. And then there are some students that are not able to finish the work in a 12-week period. And so that's where a withdrawal will come in. And there are some ways that we use institutional structures to make sure that when they get the withdrawal, I help them find the next best option, whether or not that's taking a class with me the next quarter to finish up their portfolio. One of the really nice things about portfolio processes is if a student does withdraw, when they go back into my class, they don't have to redo all the work they've already done. They just pick up wherever they left off, which is a really nice feature for students. And then some students, I always say I'm not the right teacher for all students. So there are some students in my class who decide to take, when they retake the class, they take it with a different person, and I'm never offended by that. In fact, I don't know that I've ever had a conversation out loud with a student like that. Usually students continue with me, probably because the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. So that's kind of a high level approach. I think
can I just interrupt you? There's something that you said that I think is going to be important for people listening to this. When you say it's ungraded, there's still, the student has to go through certain actions and produce certain work in order to give themselves the right to grade themselves. It sounds like that's process.
Yes.
It's not just show up on the first day, give yourself an A on the last day.
Yeah, no, not at all. In fact, you could think about it like a barrier they have to clear. But the whole point of this, so I say this to my students, this is not a get out of learning free card. This is a letter grades. I have a lot of scientific and experiential evidence that letter grades are harmful for student learning, harmful for teacher-student relationships, and actually get in the way of what I'm trying to do. And so what I want to do is I want to just get rid of the letter grade process so that we can actually center in on learning. And, maybe it's useful to kind of see what that looks like. Is that something
that sounds great? Why don't we look at that?
So I wonder if I can steal back the screen share, and I'll kind of.
Absolutely. Let me just stop sharing.
And then, in order to do this, this gets into what my current grading practices are. So if I drop this down, one of the things that I love to do with my students is I love to encourage them to create a learning portfolio. And that learning portfolio, the challenge that I give them is I want them to write their own textbook for the course material. And it's not just a textbook. It's a textbook so this is the thought experience I run them through. So imagine you finish my class. And on the day you finish, you put your portfolio away and you put it in a closet and you leave it there for 10 years. And then 10 years from now, you're working on a professional project. And it turns out that professional project requires this content. At that moment, when you dust off your portfolio, you should be able to understand every idea and thought that you had in that portfolio well enough that you don't have to go to any other external resource, right? So, and that's a challenge. That's really hard for students because they're not used to thinking that way. And so one of the things that I do is that the whole class is structured around getting students to learn at a very deep level. And many students are not used to this because they come into my classes with years of trauma. It ends up that high stakes standardized testing and letter grades focus students' mind on incentives that actually get in the way of authentic learning and are much more about performance and output, right? And so one of the things that comes up is when I put this challenge, like every student writes their own textbooks. I have students that have written 850 pages of handwritten math. I've had students that have solved hundreds of practice problems as part of this. Not all students do that, though those are outliers for sure, but it is not uncommon for a student to write between 80 to 150 pages. That's a common experience. I had one guy lay tech up for his learning portfolio. He didn't want to do notes because his notes he didn't want me to look at his notes. He showed them to me, but that wasn't what he wanted to earn the grade with. His whole portfolio was solutions to problems. And I think he solved in LaTeX, he set up solutions to about 150 good practice problems. I had another guy who had read the book Ultra Learning and wanted to do a mind map plus an ultra learning project. So he ended up coding up a morphs and warps thing. And then he had this very beautiful mind map that if you looked into it, actually had the stuff contained. So let me be really clear. When I say write a textbook, that's a general statement, but every student has control, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Challenge that I pose when I'm coaching them, though, is that when they do their work, I'm going to be looking for multiple categories of thought for each idea that they study. So I have, these are some of them. One of them I haven't included is meta learning, but So I say when students write their work or create their work, I want to see evidence of what I call abuelita language. This is from the scholar Rochelle Gutierrez. And the idea is that I want students to create and capture, write it down, language that they could teach the math that they're studying to their abuelita, to their grandmother. So it has to be jargon free, and it has to be highly intuitive. Some of my students have told me that this is the Feynman technique.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't know that. It's fun that I'd never heard of the Feynman technique. You probably did this in your research.
Well, I'm right up the road from Caltech, so and Feynman's house is about a quarter of a mile away from my house. So that he's quite a figure over here.
Yeah.
But I love that we have Rochelle Gutierrez and Richard Feynman in this conversation together.
Yeah, I think and so. And the point is, like, actually, if you put a slingshot to my head and you said you're gonna hit me in the head with a rubber band, choosing between abuelita language and nerdy language, I would always say abuelita language has to come first. And I challenge my students for this too. And it's hard for them because they're so used to imagining that the language of the textbook and the language of the teacher is better than their language. I agree. My statement is, if you get in a street fight with a mathematician, you definitely want to have nerdy language in your back pocket, right? You want to be able to, if you're getting in a deep technical conversation with a trained professional, you want to be able to use the language that they use so that the people you're listening to and speaking with, you are both on the same page. But the funny thing about nerdy language is it's like a Russian doll. The meaning of the language is optimized for transmission between professionals. And in order to get down to that meaning, you actually have to decompose that language into intuitive structure. So the scholar Guershon Harel from UC San Diego has a beautiful conversation about the difference between concept images and concept definitions. This was in his paper, the follow-up paper to the Linear Algebra Curriculum Study Guide. It's a beautiful one. But the point is that I want my students to start with abuelita language, start with their own intuition, and then as they build that, translate that intuition into the formal nerdy language that they then memorize and et cetera. So we start with the deep understanding, and then we code that deep understanding in words. And when they do this, this also reminds me of Paulo Freire. If I've read a lot about Paulo Freire's work to teach people that don't know how to read. And the idea is when they have a really rich mental model, the word is almost trivial. Like the word comes in and then right?
Well, match this to this, because they have the structure there.
You got it. Yeah. And so those are just two of the 10 categories that I look for every idea that they study. So another one is, this relates to George Polya's How to Solve It. In addition to deeply intuitive language and nerdy language, can you visualize the thing that you're studying? Can you actually discuss a visual representation where you include, my joke is, you ever read a textbook where you see a visual and there's no description of what it is and you're completely lost on what the visual means? So I'm like, you can't just develop a visual representation. You also got to develop language to describe that visual representation and map it back to your abuelita and nerdy language. And I'll as I complete this post here, I'll expand these so that everything I'm saying is written in more coherent form, right?
Yeah, cool.
In addition, I want my students to learn how to ask questions and to inquire. So self-directed learning. I think it's so important that students know how to articulate, technical questions. And my joke is always like, you ever working on a problem on a Tuesday and you have a question and you write a single word, like the word why, and then you look back on Friday and you have no idea what that word means.
Right.
So when I'm looking at their work and when they're making their textbook, I give them the 2-minute rule. So if you're working through something and you get stuck, I want you to put a timer on for 2 minutes. And then within that 2 minutes, you can do anything you want. You can call your PhD cousin, you can go online, you can watch a video. And if you get the answer, document it. Because if you've got stuck today, what's likely to happen next week?
Right.
Probably gonna get stuck on the same thing. So make sure to document that. But if your timer goes off and 2 minutes are done, I want you to spend 60 to 120 seconds articulating a very clear and concise question. What are you stuck on? What are you struggling with? And what do you want out of it? And I actually look for this in their work. I teach them how to put little Post-it notes on it, or in a digital form, put a little hyperlink so that they can find those questions really easily.
Mhm.
And then when we come in, they can use those questions to guide their group work and conversations with me, right? But that's something that I look for in their textbook. I also look for, I call curiosity, interest, and intrigue a lost art. The school system, this reminds me of the quote, don't let your schooling interfere with your education. We tend to socialize students out of their childhood curiosity by telling them that they must conform to a list of degree requirements without telling them why those degree requirements exist, how it fits into their future world, right? And so one of the types of knowledge that I feel very serious that I want my students to do is actually to reignite that child inside of them that might actually be curious about the content, right? And I want them to capture that. So I actually look for evidence of that in their portfolios. And when we talk, I work hard to help them build that fire. In Daniel Coyle's book, The Little Book of Talent, he calls this ignition. So it's not the case that all of my students are ignited on the content that we're working on. But my claim is if we can plant little kindling, right? And start to feed that kindling, maybe over time they'll get there, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to stop you there because I can see there's a rich list here. Can you tell me a little bit about what you can even leave that list up.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Helpful for our conversation. When you are going through the process, because what you're talking about is something that I think is critically important, that grading is deeply entwined with pedagogy. So a lot of the things you're talking about, somebody who doesn't change their grading could say, oh, but I'm going to have them journal and that's going to be part of their grade and they're going to be creating a resource. I think all of that makes a lot of sense. How are you processing this? You're saying I'm giving them feedback on their textbook as they're writing it. I'm sure you've scaffolded it out across the semester, et cetera. But what is the load here? Because I'm feeling a little panic in myself, like, oh my God, I'm grading 40 textbooks.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Yeah. So one thing that I want to do is I want to disambiguate or actually separate the idea of feedback from the word of grading. Those are separate things. And I fully, and then also, let me answer your question directly. So one thing that I say from the beginning of the quarter is this textbook is not for me, Jeff, it is for each of you. And we talk a lot about motivation. So what, I think a prerequisite for having the conversation, how do I give them feedback, is the framing around that. That was not in your question. And so I might put a pause on the framing process because I flip my classroom. So I give students two types of resources. I give them an open access textbook and YouTube videos that present very similar ideas. They're not directly overlapped, but yeah. So that means that students, and then we work very hard as a team in the first 2 weeks to set the expectation that students are getting access to content outside the classroom. So they're actually doing the textbook writing process as much as possible outside the classroom. Okay. Which means 100% of my in-class time is designed for small group work and what I call learning conferences with my students. Okay. So I have, at Foothill College, we have 5 academic hours. An academic hour is 50 minutes of class plus a 10-minute break, which always makes me laugh, right? So an academic hour, yeah. Which I don't know this word break. I don't really understand what that word means because it never happens, right? For me anyways. Yeah.
I've noticed that about you, Jeff.
Yeah, so the 250, and then our classes are 40, the seat count is 40 people, which is way too many. So if you take 250 and you divide by 40, it ends up that number is 6.25. So 6.25 minutes per student per week. Right. And that's assuming that I'm doing no content delivery. Right. That is a really brutal, what that says is that the state of California and national government think that transformative education, to do that with students, they deserve 6.5 minutes, 6 minutes and 15 seconds of an expert's mind, right? Over a 12-week
one-on-one, yeah.
Over a 12-week quarter, that's like less than 2 hours, right? It is absolutely ridiculous. That assumption is so harmful, and that goes into the policy problems. But the nice thing is, with a little bit of creativity, students and I can work together. So one of the things I do is I have students break into 4-person groups. I call these learning groups. Each learning group is 2 learning partnerships. So a learning partnership is 2 students. two learning partnerships becomes a learning group. In groups that are not equal to 0 mod 4, sometimes in classes that have the seat count not 0 mod 4,
Right.
in other words, they're not a factor of 4 for non-mathematicians. There are sometimes groups of 5, which I'm okay with. Groups of 6 are too large.
Right. That makes sense.
What happens is I break 250 minutes per week. I can actually just show this from a previous class. You can see the screen, yeah?
Yeah, got it.
Okay, so I can show it from this quarter, actually. So we have what we call a portfolio meeting schedule. Students kind of track their own. This quarter, my students are a little bit less excited about this. Last quarter, my students were really excited about a public mechanism to track progress. Okay. So they kind of let that go. But the schedule, the learning schedule looks something like this. So, I have about 3 meetings per day. Each meeting is with a group of 4. Got it. Each learning partnership decides which, I might want to be a little careful. I don't know if we can blur this out, the names of these out when it comes time to do. We'll work on that when we're there. So what's cool about this is that so my first meeting with Lena, Nick, Megan, and Andrew, Lena decided to present her portfolio first. Nick was note taker. Over here, this is a Google Doc with the meeting notes. So as Lena's presenting, the entire group is listening very careful to what she says, including myself, asking follow-up questions, and Nick is taking notes. Got it. And then after Lena kind of gives an overview of what she's done since I've seen her last, I'll give targeted feedback in the deliberate practice zone. So this gets to a larger model of learning that is kind of useful. When I'm listening very careful for the evidence that I've asked students to collect, and also trying to get a sense of where they are, because students come at a whole spectrum. And so the whole idea is that, from the science of expertise development, it ends up that real expertise, this comes from the book Peak by Anders Ericsson, and also A Talent Code by Daniel Coyle, The Little Book of Talent by Daniel Coyle, and Talent is Overrated by Jeff Cloven, which are a review of 50 years of the science of expertise and what we've learned in that 50 years. So it ends up that if we're serious about having our students develop deep expertise, we got to do that in deliberate practice, right? We've heard these words before. So I actually have my students do an entire meta learning series in the first 2 weeks, so that they all know, they read this article. This is a blog post I write for them. And the whole idea is that I'm going to help my students stay in their sweet spot. And so when I'm listening to Lena present, I'm listening very carefully to see where her learning's at, what skills she's developed, what skills might help her go deeper. And then we as a group after she's presented her work, we start talking about what she might change. And in the early stages, students are not used to this type of feedback. And so I have to do a lot heavier lifting because they're so used to the punitive form of mathematical corrections, right? Right. That are not actually specific. So if we think this gets into the theory of feedback, there's a great book called Ultra Learning by Scott Young, and he has a section on feedback. Traditionally, students are in high stakes exams where we send the exam home with the teacher takes it home, puts -5 to indicate an error, but doesn't say what the error is or what the student can do to correct it. So my joke about this is I ask my students, do you have a favorite basketball player? And a lot of them say Steph Curry. Right. So yeah. imagine that, my joke is, imagine we have a young Steph Curry and he's learning how to shoot 3-points. And so he shoots a 3-point, and immediately as the ball leaves his hand, we get a way to blindfold him and put earmuffs on. And then a coach videotapes his shot. So Steph doesn't actually know if his ball goes in. The coach takes the videotape home, marks on a sheet of paper -5 for different parts of Steph's shot, -5, -10, and then comes back on Monday and gives the tape and then maybe fines him $100 for every mistake. So punishes him, right? And my joke to my students is, what would that do to a young Steph Curry, right? Oh, right. Yeah. And so the point of the corrective feedback process is it's an instantaneous dialogue where I'm able to push students to new places. And the cool thing is, because it's a dialogue, so they've given me, this is what I've done so far. I listen really carefully, and so does everybody else in the group. And then we come up with some suggestions. And then before we pass the mic to the next presenter, I say, what did you hear and what do you want to try next? And so then the student has to articulate themselves what they're going to do. And the nice thing is, while they're doing that, the note taker is actually like writing down what they said. Because then when the thing ends, okay, so next time you present, please, I always say maintain and improve. So everything you've done so far, don't drop it. But then we're going to look for evidence that assuming that you're not in survival zone, we're going to look for evidence that you're addressing new skills and adapting those into your work. And that evidence is going to get tracked back to that meeting that we had. And so the nice thing is under this, and then, so Lena did that for 15 or 20 minutes. Then we pass the mic to the other learning partnership. The other person starts to present, their note taker take notes, everybody's listening. And the funny thing is the note takers, so at the end of that process, both presenters have had a really good showing of their work, and they have specific things that they're going to do to correct, to improve their learning so that their next.
And the other thing I just want to jump in is that the people witnessing that and participating in that are also in the process of thinking about how does that relate to what I'm doing? How can I up my game? And I love that as you're giving the feedback, you're keeping in mind, pushing people out of their comfort zone, which is hard, but keeping them out of the panic zone. I can't remember what the top one was called, but getting out of our comfort zone is something that a lot of students are resistant to because of the fear. And I think what I'm hearing you say is if we try to do these wonderful, rich activities in the context of grading, we degrade that process. Is that
yes? In fact, not only do we grade it, it's impossible, because what the student's going to be doing is thinking, what do I have to do to satisfy this guy? Right? They're going to be focused on external metrics of, because the control rests with me, the teacher, not them, the student. Right. But when they know that I have alleviated that threat, that all they have to do on a daily basis, and this, I can show you some of the rules that I use to guide this, but yes, you actually took the words right out of my mouth. You skated to where the puck was going. Yes, that. Sorry. I love it. No, thank you. That beautiful. Like you're right on. Yeah, it just alleviates some of that psychological strain and allows for authentic growth, and it allows for risk taking. If I'm using, and this gets into the theories of grading. Grading was never designed to allow for a creative thought. It's designed to what is good for a hungry rat in a lab is an accurate model for the human soul. And what ends up happening is when we put young people under threat like that, for them to get into the comfort, into the sweet spot on a daily basis is a direct contradiction, because sweet spot learning requires failure. It requires really, really difficult work, right? And failure under the traditional grading scheme is punished. So any smart person who's going to be punished for failure is going to do everything that they can to avoid that. But that means that if my goal is to really push students into a new space, I need to use every tool in my quiver, or every arrow in my quiver, to get them into that deliberate practice zone. And it ends up that traditional grading, the structures behind them, are the antithesis of that process, right? And so it took me a long time to realize that actually in removing grading, I do what I'm supposed to do, and I do it for every student rather than just students that come from high socioeconomic status who have private tutors, right?
Right. So that actually brings us to a later question, because I think we've talked a little bit about the theory, and you're going to give a lot of links in your resources that can help people dig deeper into that. So can we jump to the obvious question, which is, boy, your approach sounds pretty different from traditional grading. It's not a baby step. It's not a small step. Some listeners might say it goes too far, that the work is radical. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how you got there. You didn't jump straight into there, and how you would answer some of those concerns.
Yeah, I guess I want to start with humility first. My favorite motto about myself as a teacher is, I suck today, but a little less than yesterday. I promised when I was a young man I wouldn't get tattoos unless somebody in my family died an untimely death, because once I get one, I'll get 1,000, right? Right. That if I had a tattoo, that one would be like across my chest. I suck today, but a little less than yesterday. So if I'm serious about thinking about how I got here, I actually consider like 4 phases. Phase one, I would call system navigation, which lasted for me from 6th grade until the end of my master's degree, which is I had like 20 something years of survival in the grading system. So I had deep experiential knowledge of how grades work, what the impact is, how they affect the psyche of my soul. So that's one part of it, right? And disambiguating the grading system from my own identity, that was difficult, right? Because as somebody that strived really hard in school, and if I was
successful, right?
Yes.
I mean, you got a PhD, like that's.
Yes. I forgive myself in thinking, well, if I could do this, anyone can. And what the problem with people that can't do it is that they're just not working hard enough or they don't have the skills, right? But like realizing that, actually, there was a lot of privilege in my personal life that allowed this to happen. And my grades had nothing to do with necessary intelligence. It had to do with strategies that I used. And then also that my teachers actually didn't know much of what they were doing. Most of my, my joke is, how many education classes did I have to take to get my job? How many anti-racism classes did I have to take to get my job? Most of my teachers had the same thing. They are expert mathematicians with zero training in education, right? But they're paid educators. This is the equivalent of, having a professional tennis player be paid to coach baseball. I'm not saying that professional tennis is not important, but if we're serious about having people do really good work, I have to realize that like getting educated, where in mathematics would we say, I want to solve a math problem and I'm just going to avoid reading any research on that problem and I'm going to just use what I think is going to happen, right?
Or use what my experience was.
And that's not a bad approach necessarily. It's just, there's
it's limited.
Yes, it's limited, right? And so that was a process that I had to go through to recognize that the skills that my teachers used on me were not necessarily, actually not research-based. It was experiential. I call it the apprenticeship of observation. And so there's a lot of healing and therapy and thought that has to go into that. So I'd say that was phase one, like processing that. And then phase two was what I would call like research and development. So in my PhD thesis, I loved numerical linear algebra. I was working on model order reduction and Krylov subspace methods, but I knew that I had a deep interest in teaching. And I didn't say that out loud to the mathematicians who were paying my bills, because it ends up that when research mathematicians hear that a young protege likes teaching, we don't fund that person as well, and we don't take them as seriously. And so outside of the context of my PhD research, I also realized that what is a master's degree or PhD other than reading a bunch of books and doing a lot of writing, right? And so in the R&D,
creating something new.
Yeah, creating something new, right? Writing, doing creative work, right? And a lot of the top tier journals are targeted towards experts in the field. But there's a lot of work to be done for young people, actually like really deep scholarship to be done, to be targeted at first, second, third, and fourth year students to propel them into greater spaces. And so one of the things that I did in my free time in my graduate degree, and then in my first few years of college, was as a teacher, I created like a master's degree or PhD equivalent in the science of learning, like research-based principles of learning. And so another way to say this is I just read a lot about how learning works. Like my joke about my students is there's my PhD in math.
There's PhD. The one in education.
Yeah, right. And it's just, I have a lot to say about later when we talk about ways that institutions can support this type of work. I have so much to say about centering continual professional growth and really celebrating folks that take getting educated in research-based learning science, right? In the same way we celebrate folks that get educated, right? If I'm a numerical analyst and I want to get educated in algebra, I'll teach an algebra class and I can get credit for that, right? Like it's something that I can be celebrated.
Part of your job,
Yes, exactly, right? Yeah. And so that was kind of phase two. And then phase three was just a bunch of failures. So from like 2000, and just horrible failure. I mean, like I have a story, I feel sad about this. This is not something that I take lightly. I killed the dreams of many, many people, not on purpose. At first, I was using the grading schemes that were given to me. And eventually I realized that no matter how hard I worked, there were weeks that I was working 70 to 80 hours for 10 weeks in a quarter, grading and doing a lot of work like that. And no matter how hard I worked, it was never enough. And at the end of the quarter, a successful quarter would be 65% pass rates. And my joke about, this is a joke full of tears, let me decontextualize my understanding of education. Let's ask a question about engineering. What do we say about an engineering firm that designs cars that kill 40% of drivers?
We wouldn't be happy.
Yeah, right. And so that was like that research and development phase led to the testing phase. And then, I have a whole process. I can put the blog post on this. The first thing that I did was I started a very small process, which I would give, I think, 1/4 of the points back on a test correction. So I wrote a test correction thing. I'd give 1/4 of the points back. I did that for one quarter, right? Like I had, first of all, instead of doing 3 midterms, I did like 5 quizzes in the final.
Right.
It was like, that was one small change that I made. Ended up killing me because when you write,
you were grading a lot.
Right? And writing the assessments and writing the solutions and all that. Okay, so that didn't work. So then I did like 2 midterms and a final, but then I allowed corrections. And that didn't work that well because the corrections, no matter how hard the student worked, they couldn't make it up. So I kept doing the correction stuff. And eventually I realized, like, instead of giving a student 1/4 of the point back, what if I would just allow them to get above a C, like any problem above a 70%, if they showed me the core technology or the core ideas behind that problem.
They're now proficient. They're
proficient in that particular thing. And I added, and then eventually that didn't work because like there's some problems with the structure. So, and then I tried what I would call like infinite mastery-based learning. So I would have assessments and I wrote over the summer, I would write 10 versions of every assessment with full solutions. And then they could just take as many times. And my thought was like any student that could memorize 10 answer sheets for like 12 quizzes, like good on them if they could do it.
Go for it.
Yeah, but so I wasn't worried. And so I tried that one for a while. And then I tried standard-based grading for a while. And the more I tried, at one point I reached a plateau of 80% success rates. And I just didn't think I could.
Which most of us would be like victory, but not death.
Because I put so much blood and sweat and tears, right? And I thought to myself, like, and I was talking to a mentor of mine, a man named Patrick Morris, who is really a visionary in this field. He's been doing this. He'd been doing this for a lot longer. And he has, at some point soon, I hope to do a YouTube interview series with him because his ideas are really powerful. And he's like, 80%, oh, you could do better. You just need to go back and think really deeply about the underlying assumptions that you're making. And when I heard that inspiration and I saw his, one of his projects, his sabbatical project, he read 100 books. And a lot of them was on anti-racism, and he's an actuary by training, and so he has some very deep ideas about what mathematical thinking can do and what it can't do. And so anyways, like when I combined all those iterative failures and the continual push with another set of research and development, and this one I got deep into the historical practice and science of assessment, books like Alfie Cohen, Punished by Rewards. There's a book, Ungrading, Hacking Assessments. I have a reading list for anybody that wants to do this. There's a set of probably like 50 to 60 books that I would highly recommend reading. And so when I combined all that iterative failure, just small things, not major changes. Every quarter I would change 2 or 3 things. With this new focus on assessment, and then also motivation. Daniel Pick's book Drive, and there's a lot of science of motivation because it ends up that grades are based on an inaccurate model for the human soul to motivate behavior. The whole idea is when students do what we want, we pat them on the head and give them a bone, and when they don't do what we want, we were going to give them an electric shock, and those things together will produce great learning. But it ends up that like
carrots and sticks.
Yeah, that model for human motivation is a very outdated and inaccurate model. And the book Drive by Daniel Pink highlights research that has been going on for 70 years where we actually highlight much better models. And so the eventual push for ungrading was combining all that iterative failure with new information. I ended up settling in on my version of this. And I say this I do a lot of coaching and consulting and stuff for folks that are interested in changing like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say that like the version that I have is not the version that's right for you. I think the important thing is to take small iterative steps on a quarter by quarter and term by term basis and combine that with some sort of external professional development where you're reading new ideas that you can steal. And over a decade, that actually builds up to a lot of amazing transformative work that can happen. And I guess the last thing that I would say, and I'll shut up on this, but a practice that I feel very strongly about and that I've done every single quarter since 2010. I started graduate school in 2008. I was a TA and associate instructor for 5 years. And as part of that work, I did teaching consulting. I was a TA consultant at UC Davis.
Mm-hmm.
And in that space, I learned how to bring student voices into the transformation process by doing what they called mid-quarter, I would call it a mid-quarter quality control survey.
Sure.
So halfway through the quarter, give students a chance to tell me what they like about the class and what they think I should keep going, and what they're struggling with and what suggestions they have for things that I can do to change.
Mm-hmm.
And then I made a commitment to actually read every single one of those and make two types of changes that would happen immediately during the class.
Mm-hmm.
And then changes, like one student recommended, hey, Jeff, build a YouTube site where you give all your videos away for free. Love it. Working on it. That's like a 3-decade-long project.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so, for folks that are interested in doing this, my statement would be small changes over long periods of time. The important thing is just to try something new, right?
Mm-hmm.
Get educated, and then welcome students as co-creators of this knowledge. Students are very, very smart, and they know what they might not have the language for it, but they'll have their words. Underneath those words are important messages for us to hear. And if you can onboard students as part of your teaching team, they really did guide my work for years, right? And they've given me, I always say to my students, you teach me more than I teach you by far, right?
Well, I think that segues us really nicely. I have no idea where we are on our on our slides here, so I'm just going to stop with the slides. And I'm really curious to hear about your work helping communities change. Our focus is really not just on individual change, but our focus for this project is to think about either, departmental change or community change. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit along those lines, just as we close out.
Yeah, I love it. So I guess one of the things that's really challenging, there's kind of a few barriers to change. And one of them is really a state and national policy problem. My joke about this is, what would you say about a parent or a group of, one parent, let's say it's a single parent that raises 4 children, right? Like just superhero, right?
Yeah.
What would we say about a parent that raises 10 kids? By themselves, right? Yeah. Now, Foothill College, I served 96 human beings a quarter. Some of my colleagues at the UC, what's your largest class? I don't know. I don't know.
120 sometimes. Yeah.
I mean, that's so dehumanizing. The idea that one person is going to be able to do transformative work with 120 people. And this actually goes back to, a lot of neoliberal policies in the 1980s, right? My joke with my students is, in the 1960s, UC Berkeley was free. I'm not saying that every class at UC Berkeley had 20 students in it, but I am saying that there are a bunch of policies that make this work really difficult and dehumanizing for teachers. And I want to just address that out loud, because what we do in our systems is we don't change policies. Billionaires still capture legislators. They still undermine taxes. That guts the tax base of universities. And then to fix that problem, we just put more students under one teacher's roof. And then we say, oh yeah, teachers, by yourself with no changes in policies, fix this problem of inequity. But the problem of inequity maps all the way back to the billionaires who are literally capturing our democracy for their own purposes, right? And so I just want to say that out loud, that, no matter what we do as an institution, there's larger social changes that need to happen to really unlock this. But with that said, I always like to say a strike day per quarter, one day that we all get on a bus and we all just go to Sacramento, and one time a year go to Washington, D.C. and we just party with drums and music and food, to let it be known that this is dehumanizing, right? Given that we're doing that type of mobilization, there are a lot of things that we can do to mitigate some of those policy harms, right? And one of those is to recognize and to center as an institution, what can we do to celebrate good teaching? What can we do to create solidarity in teaching, right? So two policies that I would recommend that I'm working on at my institution, we have what we call PGA credit, Professional Growth Awards. So those are units that allow faculty member to move down in their, basically professional development units that allow you to move down in your salary scale. That's an incentive that's institution driven. We also have a professional conference fund where faculty can apply for conference money in order to go to hotels and stuff like this. Mm-hmm. I would like, so in the last 2 years, I've been running free consulting for my school. For other schools, I can't afford, the travel process. So actually, there's some people that wrote some grants and they'll pay me a small fraction. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I do is I run a book club cohort where co-run it with other faculty members, where we actually read books about grading. So we read Grading for Equity last year, and this year we're reading. Yeah, it's a good one. This year we're reading Ungrading, and we do a lot of great. So the activities, it's basically a master's level, graduate level seminar on assessment, like how assessment works. So we give guidelines for faculty participation. We highlight meeting schedules. We meet about once a month. Before we meet, everyone reads. We have some questions to do some writing. We have pairs that we work together. We've negotiated with the institution to get professional growth credit for this as part of the salary scale. But I also am working with our union to change the wording in the policy that for professional conference funds, so that faculty could apply for direct stipends. So instead of money going to Hilton and Southwest for a one-day conference, right? You ever get done with a conference and there's like 90 hours of work to do from that conference, and then you're alone because no one else.
Right.
Okay. So imagine that same amount of money, instead of going to multinational organizations, goes directly into your pocket for a year-long reading seminar with 5-6 other colleagues.
You bring it home and you propagate it.
Yeah, and it ends up that like you can get, reading a book over a year, you can get so much more than watching that author speak for an hour.
Right.
And so that policy, that's a really good one for institutions. Like, change your wording on the conference funding to give direct faculty payments for doing this. You're really paying for faculty time, right? You just giving credit to the fact that we're busy people and we got a lot going. Let us pay you for the time that you spend working together in solidarity on this, right? And create an institutional culture around professional growth and around action-oriented curiosity in the space of assessment, in the space of research on learning, in the space of anti-racism or anti-oppression, so that our faculty can be sponsored and supported in doing deep re-education as part of the way they think about their work, and that you're creating like real institutional expertise around that and a culture of continuing learning, right? Wow. So that's one thing that I think is really powerful that I'm working on at Foothill, right?
Great.
Yeah, another one. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I should pause. I have some other stuff that
No. I think that's. I mean, I'm just so so pleased to hear this very concrete and approachable task. Do you think that it would be practical within a math department? So I think it's great to work across communities, across academic communities, and I can imagine that would be a great activity, but I can also see how it might be a really great activity for people who are all teaching the same class to have some time set aside where they're going to do a book club around grading. And so they're thinking together about the same application. So there's a really rich feedback. Do you see that as a practical thing?
Not only do we that's how I started. I always like to say start personal, local, and immediate. So the way that I started at Foothill, not many of my colleagues, I'm very careful about outing myself in public because I recognize my colleagues are very busy people. And I want to be a good colleague and support them. So many of my colleagues have not been fully aware of how much work I do on this.
Right.
In other spaces, a little bit easier because I'm not working with them. They see me as an outsider and there's a consultant, we can get that guy to come help, right?
Right.
But the way that I did this in my local space is we just started in the math department. We secured funding for a 1-year pilot program where they could choose between PGA and a stipend of about $1,440, $40 an hour. I was upset about that because I think faculty members, like, you deserve like $1,000 an hour. The amount of work that you do, like, just period, right?
Right.
Yeah, so we ended up getting 6 of our math department faculty together, and I could imagine at an institution, and I would recommend that. That's a really easy way to, like, yep. Yeah, and those 6 faculty, the nice thing is we teach a variety of classes, and so now, and some of my students go on to one of the other people in that group, and so now all of a sudden, like, the fact that we're thinking together on this, and I want to run this every quarter. So that's a local thing that math departments can do without, especially if you have, community college, we don't have as much money. But like, if you had a little bit of money in a math department, that's something that could be done really easy without institutional support. If you had institutional support, you could actually get facilitators, people who pay out their teaching load to facilitate small cohorts. Like I myself, I think with a 1 teaching load release 3 quarters a year, I think I could run training for 56 faculty members per year, like, easily. And that would cost the institution probably around, I think
$5,000, $6,000, something like that.
Yeah, I think the teaching release plus benefits would cost a little bit more than that. Like, probably $50,000, right? But if you think about $50,000, like, my joke about this is,
because over the year,
over the whole year, right? Yeah, but like, okay, if you go from a 40% failure rate to a 0% failure rate, do you know how much money we're saving the institution in recidivism? Yeah. Like, so you invest up front, and it's not going to be instantaneous. This is there's some delay here between the time that you're doing the reading and the time that you implement. But the idea is that you're investing the expertise of your people up front to solve major institutional problems that waste orders of magnitude more money, right? And so there's some retraining that has to do there. And then, another thing. So yes, I love your idea. I love the idea of starting locally. In fact, I would recommend that. Like, the less work you have to do to convince other people to change, the better. So doing local stuff with other people in your department to do the reading, et cetera. And, one of the fun things that I would recommend, I have this one and one more, and then I'll shut up about this.
Okay.
One of them is maybe, I do this myself because my students have requested it. So every year I track all of my reading in a public space. Right. So it's fun. I'm still getting better at these systems. Last year was 27 tracked. I think it was more like 32 if I actually look at all the stuff. And the nice thing, if all of us are publicly displaying the work that we're reading and the work that we're doing, this is like a publication count. And it's a way, and the reason that's fun about that is that, Kate, if I go to your website and I see some books you're reading, I can go talk to you about those books, right?
Right. I read that, or I'd like to read that, or yeah.
And students, it's really fun when students recommend books that I read. Like, it's such an amazing interaction. Like, whoa, I controlled that guy's mind, right?
Yeah, there's an impact.
Yeah, right. And so that's one thing, like, that's another thing that we can do locally to create a culture around that and kind of have fun with it. And then another thing, a policy that I think is really useful, because this is all about policies, right? How do we create policies that make it easier for good people who want to do good work, but are burdened with really bad state and national funding policies that are harmful for the teacher and the students? How can we alleviate that? And another one that I'm working on is giving a pay differential. So, Kate, let's say that we were working in the same department and we decided to co-teach classes together. It ends up that there's like maybe an X squared or X cube inefficiency there, because now we actually have to talk about stuff that if I was by myself and you were by yourself, we wouldn't have to talk about. Well, you could imagine a world where an institution and administration that sees that says, you know what, Kate and Jeff, the quarter you do that, we're going to give you an extra X number of dollars for the extra work that you're doing, so that it sends the message that solidarity in teaching, dialogue, real dialogic praxis where we're working as a team is something that we respect, and that I don't want to say expect, but that we value, and we value
reward.
Yes, right. And so I think those are all, I have many more ideas, but those are a few ideas that I am working on in the personal, local, immediate spaces of Foothill College and some of the other colleges that I do consulting for, right?
That's wonderful. Jeff, thank you so much. I'm just going to share my screen one more time, because I think, we could go on for a long time. Jeff and I have had several conversations, and We've really enjoyed talking to each other. So, but I think we need to wrap this up. But I want to just reflect back on what I've heard and a little bit of the end of the conversation, the parallels between our lives as research mathematicians and our lives as research educators. That's really what I hear you saying. If I walk around and I run into somebody who's got a copy of the, Sayre's book on then I feel community with that person. I know that they know the language that I know, that they've read that, and doesn't it bother you that this book doesn't have an index or something like that? This is what you're trying to create with your suggestions, I feel, and that community is how we thrive. Did I capture that?
Yeah, definitely. And I one thing I want to say, thank you so much, Kate, for all that you do and for your work and your expertise. I feel so lucky to have met you and to be in contact. And I just see so many great things that you're doing, and I hope to continue to support and work with you. I also love the idea of playing into that fire that exists in our mathematical hearts and minds. Mm-hmm. I look at this as a mathematical research problem. Like literally, I think about it as a technical problem. How do we create really research-based, effective and efficient mechanisms to train the next generation of mathematicians, right? And there's so much value. All great PhD researchers began as undergraduate students. And, when we create research papers, we're doing a process that, maybe has a 10 to 30 year time span, right? Mm-hmm. Because other people will take those ideas, they'll expand on the ideas, et cetera. Right. When we use our very well-trained minds, our license to learn, our degrees are licensed to learn. When we apply those same research mechanisms to the space of highly effective research-based teaching and learning practices, we are solving a very valuable problem in our field, which is maybe a 30 to 60 year time frame. We're developing the next generation, and we're eliminating so many of the barriers that might have caused us trauma and harm and put all the tears that we shed. Mm-hmm. We're allowing that next generation to avoid those and to get a much richer experience in classes. And so one thing that I love what you're saying, and yes, you captured it, right? Mm-hmm. And it reminds me of Terence Tao's paper, What is Good Mathematics? Good mathematical pedagogy is actually an incredible gift to our field. And to me, it is on par with the P equals NP problem, right? Or any of the Clay Institute of Mathematics. This ends up being incredibly intellectually difficult, right? To be able to do it well. And it requires a huge commitment of intellectual, emotional, and psychological energy on par with the best mathematical problems in our century, right? And so I would tap into that and invite mathematicians who are excited about solving hard problems to take this as seriously as they take anything in math space, because not only can we have an impact on mathematics in terms of research, we also, the impact factor is measured in lives change and communities empowered, right?
Right. I think we're going to leave it right there. Thank you so much, Jeff. Take care.
Thank you, Kate. Take care.